Love is in the air, everywhere I look around. Love is in the air.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video I will be sharing my thoughts on the final day of the 3-day 2019 Love Never Fails convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you've been following along so far, you'll know that I've given my thoughts on the Friday and Saturday of the 3-day convention. We're now on the Sunday. As you would expect, there's some interesting material that gets shown to the millions of Jehovah's Witnesses that are attending these events, not just the talks themselves, but also the propaganda videos that get shown in these talks. I've selected the most interesting parts from all of this material, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Jehovah, provas nós vamos ter, mas não há o que temer. Jeová protege quem é leal, Jeová vai nos socorrer. Oh, mansos busquem a Jeová, o livramento Deus trará. Justo ser e com fé viver, e Jeová nos protegerá. Com sua mão, com seu poder, Deus nos livrará.
So what we've just been watching is part of the music video presentation for Sunday morning, and as I've mentioned in previous convention rebuttals, these music video presentations are designed to let witnesses know that they need to find their seats in readiness for the talks to begin. It used to be that this was just a case of playing music or orchestral music, but as you can see, that's now different. They now are making quite an effort in playing quite emotional material. Music videos that are really intended to pull on the heartstrings, and in this particular case, they are reaching for the tried and trusted subject of persecution. Because if there's one thing that Jehovah's Witnesses need in order for their beliefs to make the slightest bit of sense, it's a feeling that Satan's world is out to get them, indeed is getting them in certain parts of the world. So Watchtower obviously plays on this and shows footage of witnesses today being persecuted. It looks like in Russia, where you have witnesses attending the courts and cheering on as one of their brothers is led away to be incarcerated. You have that footage, and you also have an archive of photographs, black and white photographs going all the way back to the early part of the 20th century, showing ill-informed, mostly totalitarian governments dealing brutishly with Jehovah's Witnesses. So there's no shortage of examples that Watchtower can draw from to show, again, backward regimes dealing in a very intolerant, foolhardy way with what are essentially a group of very misguided individuals who are already victims of their leaders and don't need to be re-victimized by the government that they are living under.
The Ark of the Covenant was finally brought to Jerusalem. David and the people danced and celebrated.
Has he forgotten he's king? Dancing like a common fool. How glorious the king of Israel made himself for the eyes of the slave girls of his servants, just as an empty-headed man.
My celebration was before Jehovah.
Michal did not love others as much as she loved herself.
So we're now in the first symposium of the Sunday morning, in fact the only symposium of the Sunday morning, and it's titled Remember How Love Behaves. It has a series of themes all taken from 1 Corinthians 13, where it says love is patient and kind, love is not jealous, does not brag, etc., etc. It goes through all of these things that love is or is not, by means of an examination of the life of King David. So what you have is a series of dramatizations and reenactments of the life of David, most of which are fairly tedious and not really that interesting. I've just selected one or two that are interesting either in their own right or in the context of how they are introduced by the particular speaker who's giving that part of the symposium. This particular video interested me because it was dealing with Michal, Michal spelt M-I-C-H-A-L, who was a wife of King David. Actually, she was the daughter of King Saul, and we see in another video her being presented to David by King Saul, almost as though she's property. But here you see her lambasting David for dancing in celebration. Michal says there, how glorious the King of Israel made himself today when he uncovered himself today to the eyes of the slave girls of his servants. Interesting how slavery is kind of casually mentioned there. Another example of the Bible, in this case the regime of one of the early kings of Israel, endorsing slavery, and nothing negative is mentioned about it. But aside from that, I just find it fascinating to see another example of women being portrayed in Watchtower propaganda in a really kind of negative way, as being very manipulative and nitpicky and, you know, moaning and whinging. It just seems to me to be a recurring theme of Watchtower video propaganda, particularly propaganda that gets shown at conventions. It strikes me that, I mean, albeit the ones writing the script here are basing it on what's in the Bible, but they're zeroing in here on a very negative female character, and you can't help but think, is it just purely your small-mindedness and sexism that's making this story so interesting for you that you have to have it portrayed at a convention in front of millions of Jehovah's Witnesses?
David was faithful to Jehovah for decades. But then he let his guard down, and he coveted a married woman.
Bring Bathsheba to me.
David and Bathsheba committed adultery, and she became pregnant. To hide their sin, David secretly ordered Bathsheba's husband to be killed. And he hurt the God who had done so much for him.
I always had a problem with this story, and I couldn't really put my finger on it as a Jehovah's Witness as to why it troubled me so much. It's only really when, after waking up from the religion, but also finding the freedom to start questioning the Bible itself, that you think, gosh, something really messed up happened in this story. And there's debates as to whether David was even a historical person. Certainly there's evidence for other kings of Israel and Judah, but the evidence for King David's existence is a bit sketchy. But anyway, back to this story, and you have here a king who commits adultery, and as part of his scheme to cover over the adultery, David gives orders for Bathsheba's husband to be put in a position in battle where it's inevitable that he's going to die. But Jehovah punishes King David by sending the prophet Nathan, and Nathan speaks to David, and David ends up being very remorseful. But when you look at what the punishment included, this is another example of a punishment prescribed in the Bible or prescribed by God far outweighing the crime. So in 2 Samuel 12, verses 13 and 14, it says, David then said to Nathan, I have sinned against Jehovah. Nathan replied to David, Jehovah in turn forgives your sin. You will not die. Nevertheless, because you have treated Jehovah with utter disrespect in this matter, the son just born to you will certainly die. And it turns out that the baby gets sick and indeed does die. So as the punishment for David and Bathsheba committing adultery, Jehovah kills a baby. I'm sorry, there is never in any set of circumstances a scenario where killing a baby makes things okay. And yet this is the morality of the God of the Bible. So this is a fairly good example, I feel, of why I and others find it difficult to take the Bible seriously as a moral authority. But that's just something I thought might be worth mentioning. On with the Symposium.
The Amalekites kidnapped the wives and children of David and his men. And his men became very bitter.
Our families were never safe here. You led them to their death! Life for life, David! You should be stoned!
Patience, please. Jehovah may rescue them. We don't know.
I'm going to level with you here. The only reason why I've chosen this clip is because I want to show you just how appalling the acting is in these Bible depictions. I mean, good grief. I think he's supposed to be crying there, but it honestly sounds to me like he's just got a very bad cold. It's really completely unconvincing, an unconvincing performance, as you would expect, I guess, from, volunteer actors. I mean, these are mostly Bethelites who are performing for us here, and it must be difficult to sit through this. It's one thing to have local witnesses on stage lip-syncing to a dramatic Bible drama recording, as used to be the case before the video propaganda era, but to have that same amateurish level in highly polished, seemingly big budget video productions like this, I don't know what must be going through the minds of witnesses in the audience. Presumably they're going to find a reason to enjoy it, but now that, again, I'm outside of the organization looking in, I just cringe at how bad some of these performances are. But anyway, I now want to show you one of the speakers from this symposium. We are still in the Remember How Love Behaves Symposium, and we've reached part number 6, which is titled Rejoices with the Truth, Bears All Things.
Our next topic under the subject of love, the next element is love rejoices with the truth. We're going to consider two situations that could be challenging in that regard. First of all, the faithful and discreet slave adjusts our understanding of a certain subject in the Bible, and it's a cherished subject of ours. But now our understanding has changed. Situation number two, which could be even more difficult. Jehovah uses his organization to make some adjustment as regards organizational arrangements. Why might that be even more challenging? It's because it could affect us personally. For example, maybe it's a restructuring of congregations and circuits and changing of boundaries and assigning us to a different congregation.
So this is very clever. You can see exactly what's going on here. Again, we're in part 6 of this symposium on rejoicing with the truth, bearing all things. And Watchtower is using this part of the symposium as an opportunity to manage the expectations of witnesses and remind them that it's not their place to complain when things change in two areas. Number one, new light. The organization's constantly coming up with revised interpretations of its teachings, usually when it becomes obvious that the previous prediction or understanding is either nonsense or it has failed simply through the passage of time. And I found it fascinating how he referred to cherished understandings of truth. Well, it doesn't matter whether an understanding is cherished or not, it matters whether it's true or not. It's quite conceivable that you could believe something that you don't necessarily like to be true, you don't necessarily cherish it, but it's nevertheless true, so you've got to believe it. So just the very idea of understandings being cherished, I found that quite a Freudian slip. But he also speaks about organizational adjustments and arrangements that impact on Jehovah's Witnesses personally. He describes it in terms of new appointments or changes in positions where, for example, an elder must stand down or two congregations merge, and as a result there are adjustments so that someone's no longer got the same privilege that they used to have. But I think that how this is intended, or the main purpose behind this message, is to again remind Jehovah's Witnesses not to complain when their congregations get disbanded or when their kingdom halls get sold to free up cash for the organization, because it's into Watchtower's pockets that the proceeds go when kingdom halls get sold, even though witnesses are persuaded to believe that they're responsible for maintenance and upkeep. But it's to manage expectations and try and persuade witnesses not to be upset when their congregation is disbanded, when they're forced to drive 40, 50 minutes to a neighboring kingdom hall. If, by the way, you're a Jehovah's Witness and you haven't already watched my Unrighteous Riches video, I talk about it a lot, but it is, in my view, an important video to watch if you want to understand fully what the organization is up to when it comes to selling off property, merging congregations, that kind of thing. I explain it all in that video, but I did find it fascinating to see witnesses being manipulated in this area in this convention.
Imagine for just a moment being in David's sandals. Here he was with a proper motive, wanting to build a house to Jehovah. And he even got the approval of Nathan, God's prophet. But then he finds out that Jehovah's thinking is different. It's his son Solomon that will have that privilege. Can you imagine how David must have been crushed? What helped him? How did he cope? Love rejoices with the truth. So it is that when we imitate David, we too are able to cope with adjustments in assignments. Please look at Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Look for something in that scripture that is helpful to us in similar circumstances. The scripture says, whatever you are doing, work at it whole-souled as for Jehovah and not for men. There it is, whole-souled service. Yes. After all, assignments are temporary. However, whole-souled service is eternal. So there are deep-seated mixed emotions that have to be dealt with. That's understandable. But with Jehovah's help, we can do it. Because after all, we're dedicated to Jehovah, not to a particular assignment, not to a particular view or understanding of the scriptures on a certain subject.
So again, just for me, fascinating. First of all, to see the manipulation here in terms of new light and reminding witnesses not to get too attached or not to cherish too much the current understanding, so that when new understandings are released as new light, it doesn't stumble them. Well, again, it's either true or it's not true, and you're well within your rights to be annoyed when the goalposts continually get moved. We've reached the point now where there have been so many changes in Watchtower theology and in Jehovah's Witness theology that it's been said before that if Charles Taze Russell and Joseph Rutherford were to somehow materialize, be resurrected in 2019, they'd have to be disfellowshipped if they didn't toe the line, if they didn't agree with what the current truth is. It's just so obvious that when an organization is man-made, it's going to have to chop and change its teachings all the time. But somehow Watchtower manages to get away with convincing Jehovah's Witnesses that the fact that they're chopping and changing all the time proves that they're being used by Jehovah or guided by Jehovah's Spirit. And you also have there the reference again to assignments. The speaker there says, assignments are temporary, but whole-souled service is eternal. The emphasis there being on whole-souled service. So if you complain in any way, if you begrudge the fact that the organization is messing you around, is extending privileges and then taking them back without having a good reason, or is sending you an extra half an hour to a different Kingdom Hall, even though you've been spending years with your contributions paying for a Kingdom Hall that's been sold with the proceeds going to Watchtower, well, are you being whole-souled, brother, if you complain?
Here, I'm dwelling in a house of cedars, while the Ark of the Covenant of Jehovah is under tent cloths.
Just to be clear, David isn't living in the house of cedars, or at least he wasn't last I checked.
David had been pursued ruthlessly by Saul. He and his men faced hunger, fear, and threat of death.
It's Saul. Today God has surrendered your enemy into your hand. Let me pin him to the ground.
David could have ended his trial then and there, but he was a man of love.
Do not harm him. It is unthinkable from Jehovah's standpoint that I should lift my hand against the anointed of Jehovah.
Despite all that Saul had done, David left the judging to Jehovah, whom he loved and trusted.
I've included this clip because for me, there's an interesting message going on here. We've already had witnesses being manipulated into not objecting when Watchtower continually moves the goalposts. Here, for me, witnesses are being manipulated into forgiving their leaders from doing pretty much anything when it comes to abuse or covering up abuse, or just acting in a very careless, negligent, or even malevolent way. The narrator there says, despite all that Saul had done, David left the judging to Jehovah, who he loved and trusted. So witnesses are here being conditioned, in my view, to forgive their leaders almost anything and just assume that Jehovah will step in at some point if things get really out of hand. Basically, wait on Jehovah, which is openly what the organization tells witnesses to do. If there's something wrong, if due to human imperfection you see that there is some injustice, just leave it in Jehovah's hands, wait on Jehovah. Of course, all this means is that those who are being abusive or acting in a controlling or corrupt way just get let off scot-free.
Like David, having pure motives and love and trust in our brothers could very well save our life. But is this positive view of others limited to our faithful witnesses? What about someone who is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses? How should we view him? Remember how love behaves, our theme. Again, going back to 1 Corinthians 13:7, the next phrase says that love hopes all things. So we hope that those who've made mistakes, even serious ones, multiple times with a poor attitude, will come back to Jehovah. Doesn't this remind us of Jesus' illustration of the prodigal in Luke chapter 15? That son made serious mistakes, but his father, who pictured Jehovah, never lost hope. Is that our attitude as well? Now, this isn't always easy. So let's go back to David's example. Notice how he showed such hope in regard to Abner.
Abner had been chief of Saul's army. He pursued David in the wilderness and supported David's rival after David became king. So why was Abner coming to see David?
My lord the king, make a covenant with us. We now support you as king because Jehovah has promised us salvation by means of your hand.
I will make a covenant with you.
Thank you.
David trusted Abner and hoped that he would now remain loyal. But Joab saw things differently.
What have you done? You know Abner. He came here to fool you and to get to know your every move and find out everything that you're doing.
Be careful. You know the law. You must not hold a grudge, and you must love your fellow man as yourself.
Joab's distrust grew into vengeance. He later killed Abner. Those who hate expect the worst, but those who love never lose hope.
What an example David was. He had reasons to doubt Abner. Abner was hunting David to kill him, and he set up a rival king against David. But David hoped that Abner would change, and when he did, he warmly and quickly forgave him. This is important for us because, frankly, a number here will feel the loss of someone leaving Jehovah. So we must develop the same love that hopes all things. And know that this hope is not something we just say to feel good. It's not just wishful thinking, some pie-in-the-sky fantasy. This hope is real and can be realized. Like many here, I benefited from this hope myself personally. Can I share an experience with you? I met one of my closest childhood friends at a large district convention years ago. Sadly, he left Jehovah a couple times. But his family, his friends, and I never lost our hope. I'm so happy that last year he was reinstated. And this weekend's been special because he and I have been able to sit together at a convention for the first time in decades. Without a doubt, love hopes all things. So don't give up on your loved ones who have strayed. And if some are here today, we hope they will come back to Jehovah.
This was just, well, frankly despicable as far as I'm concerned. You have here Jehovah's Witnesses, millions of Jehovah's Witnesses, because we can assume that the sentiments we're hearing here are being repeated, that this guy is actually reading from an outline that is telling him to say these things. So this is not just one convention, this is many conventions. Jehovah's Witnesses are being told to expect disfellowshipped ones to return, to expect disassociated ones to return, to continue to shun them in expectation of this happening. It's one thing to manipulate families to disintegrate, to tear apart. It's one thing to manipulate people to put an end to cherished relationships, to important relationships. We all know about the psychological damage of shunning. But to then manipulate witnesses so that they continue to hold a candle for reunification on the grounds that the person is willing to toe the line, is willing to at least pretend that they believe, is just despicable. It's only adding insult to injury, because Watchtower has already inflicted enough damage by forcing these family separations. And I'm of the opinion that the longer these separations go on for, the more immune both parties get to the possibility of reunification. You learn to live without someone that you haven't seen for years or even decades. You just get through it, and you adapt, which makes it harder actually to even think about getting together again after so many years have gone by. So the longer it drags on for, the more unrealistic it gets. And Watchtower is here saying, oh no, you just keep on hoping for all of those years and all of those decades, perhaps, that you and your disfellowshipped loved one are separated, because they'll want to return to Jehovah. It's sickening, really. Again, adding insult to injury. And how dare this speaker invoke the story of the prodigal son, talking about how the father never lost hope. If the prodigal son story teaches us anything, it's that Watchtower's shunning policy has no biblical grounds. Because here was Jesus spelling out the very scenario where a delinquent son does wrong, commits some kind of wrongdoing, having left home, and he and his father are physically estranged for at least a period. The only reason, as I've said many times on this channel, but I'll say it again just in case I have new viewers, the only reason why the prodigal son returns is because he runs out of money, rendering his ability to commit debauchery impossible. He no longer has the opportunity to commit debauchery. Okay, no more money. I'm eating the same food as pigs. I may as well return and at least be one of my father's hired servants. In other words, he returns expecting to be shunned. By modern Jehovah's Witness standards, the very fact that he's only returning because he feels sorry for himself, because he's no longer has the ability to live this life of debauchery, shows what elders would term worldly sadness. In other words, it's just his circumstances that make him feel bad, not the sin itself. So he returns fully expecting to be shunned, and the account says while he was still a long way off, his father ran to him. No question at all in that story, is he repentant or not? Has he met with the elders? Do we have reason to believe that he has corrected this wrong path and received proper discipline for what he... No. The father runs to him and says, let's slaughter a cow, let's put on a feast. We've got back the family member who was lost to us. We've essentially got him back from the dead, because who knows where he could have ended up. This story completely torpedoes the whole idea of Jehovah's Witness shunning. So frankly, I don't know what was on this guy's outline, whether he was told to mention it. But how dare this man invoke that particular story in defense of a shunning policy, and again, to really put the boot in, to tell witnesses or manipulate witnesses into thinking that they should expect their disfellowshipped or disassociated ones to come crawling back to their abuser, the organization, to want to be lied to want to be exploited and manipulated. No, thank you. Not going to happen. So when my father listens to this talk, he's going to be very conflicted, because his head is going to be telling him there's no way in the world Lloyd's coming back. And yet his heart, at least according to this speaker, should be telling him Lloyd's going to come back, Lloyd's going to come back. Absolutely despicable.
Let's turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 2, and here Jehovah tells us how to react, what to do when someone comes back to him. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, look at verses 6 through 8. It says, "This rebuke is given by the majority, that of disfellowshipping, is sufficient for such a man. Now you should instead kindly forgive and comfort him, so that he may not be overwhelmed by excessive sadness. I therefore exhort you to confirm your love for him." Notice, confirm your love for him or for her. We hope that our loved ones will come back to Jehovah, and when they do, verse 7 says that we will kindly forgive and comfort them. We'll give confirmation of our love for our loved ones.
What we have here is just open and blatant twisting of the scriptures. I've actually already done a video on Bible verses that debunk shunning as carried out by Jehovah's Witnesses, and if you haven't seen that video and you're interested in this subject, by all means check it out. But the speaker here invokes 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verses 6 to 8. What's interesting is that the verse most often used by Watchtower in defense or to prop up its disfellowshipping practice, which, by the way, the organization has only had in place since 1952. So in 1947, they had an Awake article denouncing the practice of excommunication as pagan, as of pagan origin. By 1952, they'd started disfellowshipping people, and then by 1981, they made it so that disassociation and disfellowshipping was the same thing or carried the same penalty, making it impossible for anyone to leave on grounds of conscience. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour through the history of disfellowshipping and how relatively recent it is that the organization's been doing this, even though they claim it's biblical. But what's interesting is that they focus mostly on 1 Corinthians chapter 5 when talking about disfellowshipping. 1 Corinthians being Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. In Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, he seemingly revisits this whole issue of how to deal with wrongdoers, and indeed, so that I'm not stretching too much, this speaker is applying these words to how to deal with wrongdoers. It's not just purely my speculation here. So 2 Corinthians chapter 2, let's read this in context, shall we? Because the speaker only reads from verses, verses 6 to 8. Let's read from verse 1. Bear in mind, Paul has written to the Corinthians with some very stern advice or some very unequivocal words about how to deal with wrongdoers, not necessarily applicable within a family setting, but that's how severely and how mercilessly Watchtower applies them. He returns to writing to the Corinthians, and in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, "For I have made up my mind not to come to you again in sadness. For if I make you sad, who will be there to cheer me up except the one I saddened? I wrote what I did, so that when I come I may not be saddened by those over whom I ought to rejoice, because I have confidence that what brings me joy brings all of you the same joy. For out of much tribulation and anguish of heart I wrote you with many tears, not to sadden you, but to let you know the depth of love I have for you. Now if anyone has caused sadness, he has saddened not me, but all of you to an extent, not to be too harsh in what I say." Don't get carried away. Don't go to extremes. It was just a few suggestions. And then he says, "This rebuke given by the majority is sufficient for such a man. Now you should instead kindly forgive and comfort him, so that he may not be overwhelmed by excessive sadness. I therefore exhort you to confirm your love for him." Now it seems to me fairly obvious in the context of, again, what Paul had previously wrote about wrongdoers and not even eating with such a man. It seems fairly obvious that he's, at least to some extent, backpedaling, especially where he says not to be too harsh in what I say. So even Paul, again, whose words are jumped on by Watchtower whenever they're trying to prop up their disfellowshipping policy, even Paul recognized that there has to be some level of mercy here and some sort of reasonableness in the extent to which you would shun a wrongdoer. Watchtower shows no such reasonableness, because they even extend the scope of the shunning not just to everyone in the congregation, but to even the shunned ones' loved ones, their family members, so that you have a scenario where parents aren't to speak to their disfellowshipped children, or vice versa. When you read the verse in its full context, this, for me, clearly shows that Watchtower are going too far with their shunning, but as you would expect, when it suits them, they'll cherry pick, and they'll use just a small portion of it to speak about the need for forgiveness, the need for embracing people back once they return to Jehovah.
When Jehovah chose David to be king, he had already rejected Saul. Even so, it wasn't yet Jehovah's time for David to begin ruling. Waiting wasn't always easy for David. He became a fugitive running for his life. Even his own men once threatened to kill him. 22 years had passed. Finally, he became king over all of Israel. True, King Saul and even some of David's friends abandoned him. But David endured it all. Jehovah had never abandoned David. So how could David ever give up his love for Jehovah?
Think about those last few words. Jehovah had never abandoned David. So how could David give up his love for Jehovah? Or in other words, how could David abandon Jehovah. You can see what the message is here, as clear as day. Watchtower is telling witnesses to continue to endure, to stick with it, even though they may have doubts, even though they may see things that don't make sense. They may be concerned about certain policies. Just stick with it, because just look at David. He had to wait for 22 years until he could be crowned king. Don't you think that was difficult for him? No, he stuck it out. His love for Jehovah could endure all things. So it seems to me as clear as day that even though this is supposed to be a generic exploration of love and the various different aspects of love, interwoven in this narrative are continued reminders by Watchtower to Jehovah's Witnesses that they ought to stick it out, that they ought to stay the course no matter how troubled they are, because if they're truly loving, there's no way that they would want to abandon Jehovah.
When David was anointed as king, he couldn't have imagined the tests that would come his way. But love helped him to face all of them. David saw that without love, we become jealous, get puffed up, behave indecently, look for our own interests, and become provoked. Love helped David to be patient, to be kind, not to brag, not to keep account of the injury, and not to rejoice over unrighteousness. Instead, love helped him to rejoice with the truth, to bear all things, to believe all things, to hope all things, and to endure all things. David faced many trials, but love was equal to all of them. When David comes back to life, he, like love itself, can live on forever.
So that pretty much concludes the material on David, shown again in the Sunday morning symposium, Remember How Love Behaves. Again, I think it's fairly obvious that there is an underlying narrative to these videos, reminding witnesses of the need to stay the course, to be patient, to put up if they have any concerns about the organization. Never mind, you just have to stick at it or you're not being loving enough. If you've never been one of Jehovah's Witnesses, perhaps your eyebrows raised slightly at that last part about welcoming David back. That's a clear reference to the resurrection teaching. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they, in paradise after Armageddon, they will be reunited with Bible characters from before Jesus. So in other words, from the Old Testament, Bible characters such as David will be resurrected and they'll live alongside them. So they'll live alongside the likes of Moses and Noah as well. Interestingly, that teaching, there was another version of it once whereby they believed that these Bible characters, or some of these Bible characters at least, would be resurrected before Armageddon, which is why there's a property in San Diego called Beth Sarim, once lived in by Watchtower president Joseph Rutherford, that he had deeded to Bible characters, including David. So David's name was specifically included in the deed to Beth Sarim, because Joseph Rutherford apparently didn't like the idea that, well, maybe he didn't like that people could point fingers at him living in such luxury. So he said, oh, well, it's not just for me, you know, it's for all of these Bible characters like David that are going to get resurrected just before Armageddon. But that's a whole other subject. We now must move on to the final item of the Sunday morning, which is the public Bible discourse, which has the theme True Love in a Hate-Filled World Where? And to take us through this fascinating Bible discourse, we need to welcome back to the stage a governing body helper who we've already heard from in this convention. Yes, none other than David Schaefer.
A popular song once stated, "Love is in the air. Everywhere I look around. Love is in the air, every sight and every sound." It's a happy thought. How we wish it were true. Can we honestly say that love is everywhere?
Love is in the air. Love is in the air.
Oh, good grief. That just made me chuckle. It really did. I've actually done that, by the way, used lyrics to songs, to well-known songs, to start talks when I was a Jehovah's Witness. But there's just something about David Schaefer doing it, especially given the fact that he's a governing body helper. I don't have any real kind of profound comments on what he's actually saying here. I mean, what he's saying is that the world is loveless and that there isn't love in the air. There's hate in the air. So that's where he's coming from with this intro, which likely will have blown away his JW audience.
I am full-blooded Cherokee. We were Indians, but yet we couldn't be Indians in the white man's world. And now you're telling me I got to go fight your war. I was drafted during the Vietnam era. When I got out, I was very angry at the government. I heard about this militant group of natives that were fighting for the rights. Protesting was a way of letting people know that we're not going to stand for this no longer.
I grew up in Ireland in a family of 10. We were Catholic and very poor. At 16, I joined the army. At school, we learned all about nationalism and the 800 years of fighting between the English and the Irish. When the conflict started in Northern Ireland, that had a tremendous effect on our lives. When you see something happening, you see foreign soldiers killing your people, fellow Catholics. I felt I had to engage and defend them against the British establishment.
So again, the theme of this talk is true love in a hate-filled world where, and as part of this talk, Watchtower has prepared this video that we've just seen featuring the testimonies of John Chewy and Martin O'Dwyer. I don't know whether I've pronounced those names correctly. So these are testimonies from people who, before becoming Jehovah's Witnesses, were politically engaged due to some form of injustice. First of all, this is fairly typical Watchtower propaganda. It's very kind of formulaic in showing a worst case scenario of someone who's gone off the rails. In the case of Martin, has probably engaged in some form of terrorism. The message being, if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, you may be prone to take matters into your own hands. If you sense some form of injustice, you may be prone to be hateful and violent and do things that are ultimately unproductive. That's the overall message here. And fairly obviously, there is injustice in the world. It's inevitable. It's always been an imperfect world. There's always been challenges to overcome, and undoubtedly, we've overcome a lot of challenges in the history of humanity. We're in a much better place now than we were even a few decades ago, let alone a few hundred years ago. But Watchtower wants us to think that the world political situation is unsalvageable, that these problems cannot be fixed unless we have their solution, which is the global genocide of anyone who isn't a follower of the Jehovah's Witness religion. That's the solution, apparently, to injustice and inequality in the world, is to kill 7.5 billion people. They're obviously not going to pitch it like that. It's far better to poke holes in those who do decide to engage politically, which is what we're seeing here.
If then you are bringing your gift to the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar and go away. First make your peace with your brother, and then come back and offer your gift. Jehovah cares about our relationships. Sacrifices were meaningless if those offering them were not at peace. Even if we justifiably have become angry about some matter, we should settle that fast. Notice what Jesus said in verse 43. You heard that it was said, you must love your neighbor and hate your enemy. However, I say to you, continue to love your enemies and to pray for those persecuting you, so that you may prove yourselves sons of your Father who is in the heavens, since he makes his sun rise on both the wicked and the good, and makes it rain on both the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those loving you, what reward do you have? Are not also the tax collectors doing the same thing? And if you greet your brothers only, what extraordinary thing are you doing? Are not also the people of the nations doing the same thing? You must accordingly be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. What beautiful words to live by. Love your enemies. Ask Jehovah that your persecutors be shown mercy, that they take action that would bring Jehovah's favor. We don't give up hope.
So, just for some context, we've just been listening to David Schaefer's remarks in between, like a before and after video about John and Martin. So we've just been introduced to John and Martin, and we're going to revisit their story. But in between those two videos, we've been listening to David Schaefer giving some comments that are simultaneously hypocritical and also very disturbing for reasons I'm going to get into. Let's first of all deal with the hypocrisy, shall we? He's here talking about the need to love your enemies. So Jehovah's Witnesses are to love their opposers, love even those persecuting them. I'm sorry, say what you will about Watchtower and its approach to apostates. You can't call the organization loving, not just in the way that apostates are punished through shunning, through having their family estranged from them through manipulation, but also if you look at the Watchtower in Focus episode we did recently on subpoena warfare. Watch that episode and tell me that Watchtower believes in being loving towards those who are persecuting them, towards their enemies. I'm sorry, what we actually see when we examine Watchtower's actions, because all we're hearing here is words. There's a difference often between words and actions, and when you examine the actions, you see that Watchtower is extremely vindictive and will waste no opportunity, will in fact engineer opportunities to make life miserable for those who are opposed to its authority. That's before we even get to the hypocrisy of this whole concept of if you greet only your brothers, what extraordinary thing are you doing? I've actually cited that verse before in my rebuttals to show that Watchtower's approach to disaster relief work runs against the scriptures, because the disaster relief work that Jehovah's Witnesses do is almost completely for the benefit of fellow believers, for the benefit of other brothers. Only every now and then do you find examples of them extending the remit of their disaster relief work to non-believers, but it's almost exclusively, you can say, for the benefit of fellow believers. How does this square up to what David Schaefer's just been saying about the need to show love to everyone, even to enemies? So he's describing one thing, but the actual reality is very far removed. But what I really wanted to focus on was his disturbing remarks about being at peace. And he reads the scripture about if you're giving your gift at the altar and you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift at the altar and go and make peace with your brother. This ties in with the footage that we've already seen in this convention of Stephen Lett telling witnesses that they should forego their rights or be prepared to forego their rights for the greater good of the peace and unity of the organization. Just because you have a right to do something doesn't mean that it's acceptable for you to do something. There are circumstances in which the needs of the organization or the needs placed on you by your faith come first.
Well, you may have the right, but what does 1 Corinthians 10:23 say? All things are lawful, but not all things are advantageous. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. So what that's saying is, even if you have the right to do something, if it's not advantageous, if it doesn't build up, then don't do it.
And in the context of child sex abuse survivors, this is deeply disturbing, because what it means is that the material that witnesses have been reading in their May 2019 Watchtower, all about how Watchtower would never dissuade victims of abuse from going to the authorities. It's their right to go to the authorities. Put in the context of what Stephen Lett was saying, we start to understand why there's such a problem in this organization of child sex abuse. It's because of this mentality which David Schaefer is also referring to here, where peace and unity between fellow believers comes first. That's the main priority. Doesn't matter whether you have a justifiable reason why you don't like someone and don't want to be around them and don't want to consider them a brother. Maybe they've molested you when you were a child. No. According to David Schaefer, you've got to be at peace with your brother.
Jehovah cares about our relationships. Sacrifices were meaningless if those offering them were not at peace. Even if we justifiably have become angry about some matter, we should settle that fast.
And this is why child sex abuse, or at least a part of the reason why child sex abuse is so rampant among Jehovah's Witnesses, because of this culture of glossing over differences, of glossing over wrongdoing, and focusing purely on peace and unity at all costs.
My wife started studying. I said, they come in here going to Christianize us and civilize us, and don't bring those Bible-toting white people around me. I don't want their religion. After Nancy started studying, she decided to get baptized. So the sisters said, are you taking her to the assembly? And I told them, I said, no, I'm going to stay home. So the sisters, said, well, who's going to watch the baby while she's getting baptized? I said, oh, yeah, maybe I should go. The way they treated each other with respect. One wasn't on this side and the other on this side. They were all together. They didn't just walk by and ignore me. They brought people over and introduced them to me. They spoke with sincerity. I thought this is the way the world should be. This is the way people should live. I'm currently serving as an elder in the Illinois River Cherokee Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. I have the privilege of teaching these ones that have moved here to learn this Cherokee language so they can teach them the good news. There's no other love nowhere. This love is genuine.
If you say so, John, I just find it infuriating that the basic message of this video seems to be, look how inclusive, look how progressive our organization is. We're multicultural. This is a place where you get to keep your culture as a Cherokee, as a Native American. And, we encourage, multiculturalism. This is an organization that steamrollers individuality in every way, including culture. John is allowed to hold on to his Cherokee identity only to the extent that it conforms to what Watchtower expects of him. If there's any culture that conflicts in any way with what Watchtower expects, he's got to get rid of that. And he's now using his Cherokee identity to educate outsiders to come in and reform more Cherokee to the Jehovah's Witness culture, which involves basically promoting the idea that the solution to mankind's problems is global genocide and getting rid of anyone who doesn't submit to the authority of the governing body. That's the culture that's being celebrated here. But how unsatisfying the reason why John went down this path to begin with. He gets tricked, you could say, into attending his wife's baptism, and when attending, he gets love-bombed. And because he's love-bombed, because he is surrounded by people who are seemingly interested in him, we can confidently say interested in him so long as he's a potential convert. Because he's impressed by this apparently is a reason to join the religion. John, you've not given us any solid reason why anyone should follow in your footsteps and join this religion. Your reason for joining is because they made you feel good.
I was in a car accident, nearly died. I started to drink because I couldn't cope with my situation. I did expect that my comrades in the Republican movement might have come to help us. It didn't come at all. I was studying the Bible 3 weeks with one of Jehovah's Witnesses. He was very English, and his wife so English. I wouldn't have chosen them to have come into my house, but they did, and they were lovely. Nobody came to see me, only the brother. He would come regularly, and that to me was a godsend, that someone cared about me. And I thought, wow, everyone is fighting for justice in the world, needn't fight, and that went right through my heart. Sometimes when I meet ex-British soldiers in the truth, I say to them, we're in the same army now, brother. The only place we can find love and friendship and companionship is in Jehovah's organization.
We're in the same army now, brother. Chilling words when you consider what that army is really all about, and the way individuality just gets trampled and every area of one's life is micromanaged. But the interesting thing here for me was the way that Martin got involved with the witnesses. He talks about being in a car accident in which he nearly died, and this was so traumatic for him that he turned to alcohol and drinking. And it was when he was in this state that the witnesses come calling. We've had this already in the convention where witnesses have almost been briefed on how to capitalize on people in this situation. We had a dramatization where a young boy was told that sometimes we need to wait until someone dies before the message starts to make sense, before people are in the right heart condition to receive the good news. This amounts to exploiting people's emotional vulnerability. It's what we've seen here. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, ask yourself, is your religion so great if it preys on people in this situation? Shouldn't it make sense even if there's zero problems in your life? Shouldn't it make sense if there isn't anguish, if there isn't trauma, if there isn't a near-fatal car accident and alcoholism? Shouldn't it make sense when you're in full control of all of your thinking capabilities and everything is well in your life? Shouldn't it matter to you that you are in God's one and only true religion? Why are Jehovah's Witnesses preying on people who are at their lowest ebb? Really, I just think both Martin and John's testimonies are sad, or the way they've been used is sad, because there will be people, or there will be children in the audience watching these videos who have the potential to be the next Martin Luther King or the next Rosa Parks. Imagine if those characters had been dissuaded early on in life not to pursue equality, not to pursue civil rights, not to pursue political change for the better. Imagine if they'd been manipulated in this way with videos like this, that their voices don't matter, that the system's broken and isn't worth salvaging, and nobody should be politically engaged, and the only answer is to join a group that teaches that anyone who doesn't agree with them deserves annihilation. Imagine if that message had been received by a young Martin Luther King or someone else who's made a real difference in pushing humanity along and improving things for everyone. This, unfortunately, is the message. This is what love for Jehovah's Witnesses is all about. It's about stifling individuality. It's about hopelessness. It's about giving up on making the world a better place and making sure everyone conforms to the drone-like status that Watchtower imposes on people.
Well, what have you observed here today at this gathering of Jehovah's Witnesses? People, young and old alike, different races, different backgrounds, worshiping, associating, enjoying one another's friendship in love and in peace. Now, maybe you're not used to seeing that so much, but it's not just here, not just in this city today. You'll find it in conventions of Jehovah's people in the Middle East, Arabs and Israelis all together, in India and Sri Lanka, Tamil and Sinhala people all together, in the Balkans, Serbians, Croatians, Albanians, Macedonians, Greeks, and Roma all together, in South Africa, Xhosa, Zulu, Afrikaners, Sepede, and Ndebele, Siswati, and Shona people all together, sitting in the same seats, singing the same songs, eating the same meals, not just tolerating each other, but really enjoying one another's friendship. The love we feel here is felt all around the world, regardless of former hatreds. It's not an act, it's a fact. You have found love in this hate-filled world. Now, why are Jehovah's Witnesses able to show such love? We love Jehovah. We love his righteous standards. And because of those standards, we have learned how to love our neighbors. We're not perfect, but we're dedicated. If this is your first time to one of our meetings, you are our guest. And we just want to tell you that we love you. We love that you have come here. We love that you have taken the time from your schedule, listened to this discourse, paid attention, and we are so happy that you're here. Please understand that what you are seeing here today is what happens to people who love Jehovah. Whether you believe that or accept it, that's up to you. We are not forcing you. We are inviting you to take the time to learn what the Bible really teaches and prove to yourself where true love can be found. It will be a decision that you will be so glad that you made, a decision that you will never regret.
Wow. So much to unpack there. Let me first of all say that one of the reasons why I've included so much footage of David Schaefer speaking at this convention is because I find him genuinely fascinating as a speaker. Here we have someone whose facial mannerisms are fairly expressionless. His face is kind of very deadpan while he's talking, and he seems to kind of overcompensate with this breathless oratory that seems to me to be almost straight out of the William Shatner school of speech. He says there, we have found love in this hate-filled world. It's quite extraordinary for me to hear him talking. Maybe I'm being unfair. It shouldn't be about how he's saying it. It should be about what he's saying. But unfortunately, he also fails on what he's saying. What he's saying is nonsense. He's talking about loving everyone who's at the convention, who's visiting. We love you. Well, you're not mentioning that this love comes with strings attached, are you, David? You're not mentioning that this is a conditional love, are you, David? This love is based on someone either being interested in becoming a Jehovah's Witness or actually being a Jehovah's Witness. That's when someone is worthy of love, in your eyes, isn't it, David? Because let's face it, if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, when Armageddon comes, you're toast. You're worthy of death. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses think when they smile and say, we love you. What they mean is, we'd love you to be a Jehovah's Witness. And not just a Jehovah's Witness, but someone who toes the line, who puts their hours in, who attends all the meetings. Because as Tony Morris said, if you're not preaching every week, if you stop preaching for a few weeks, even then you're toast, even though you profess to being a Jehovah's Witness and profess to following the authority of the faithful slave. This is a love that comes with strings attached. So he can go on all he likes about different races and backgrounds. It's quite conceivable that you'll have Israelis and Arabs in the same convention, or people from completely different ethnic backgrounds that are associated with conflict meeting together because they've had their individuality torn from them and because they're now part of a collective where everyone must love each other. It's good that they love each other. It's good that they're not trying to kill each other or they're not at war with each other. But the reason why they're not at war with each other is because they're now following an organization that celebrates the prospect of everyone dying who isn't in the religion. But more than anything, I just resent how misleading and disingenuous Schaefer is in just these comments here. We're not perfect, but we're dedicated. Couldn't any masochistic, abusive, narcissistic group or individual say such a thing? I may not be perfect, but at least I'm dedicated.
Hope in Jehovah and follow his way, and he will exalt you to take possession of the earth. When the wicked are done away with, you will see it. You will see it. Yes, you can be there if you hope in Jehovah, if you put your complete trust in his wonderful promises, and if you show true love now, then our loyal God will reward you with everlasting life and everlasting love.
Everlasting love. I feel like there was an opportunity there for him to include another song in his talk, but never mind. Isn't it interesting how he says, he quotes the verse, the Bible verse, when the wicked are done away with, you will see it. You will see it. Do you want to see it, though? This is my question to Jehovah's Witnesses. We've just heard there, because quite often when you're talking about Armageddon or the paradise or any of the details of what's going to happen, if things start getting uncomfortable, the fallback position is, oh, well, we don't want to speculate too much, brother. We could be wrong, and we'll just wait and see how things work out. But David Schaefer has just said, when the wicked are done away with, the wicked being anyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness, we're talking 7.5 billion men, women, children, babies. If you don't believe babies are going to be killed at Armageddon, do you really want to tell me that babies are going to be spared and they're going to be raised with full knowledge that their parents were killed by the God that they're supposed to worship every day? Men, women, children, babies, all annihilated in the biggest act of genocide the universe will ever have seen. And Jehovah's Witnesses are here being promised, you will see it. Do you want to see it? Ask yourself that serious question. Do you really want to witness that spectacle of slaughter on an unfathomable scale? Think of how many people there are in a city like New York, and think what it would be like if everyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness in New York were to be killed. We're talking corpses everywhere. We're talking mountains of corpses. And however these corpses are disposed of, whether it's birds, whether it's, as Gerrit Loesch once posited, teams of witnesses doing nothing but burying bodies, potentially for years or even decades. However the evidence of this atrocity gets covered up, do you really want to see the atrocity? Do you really want to see this happen? Food for thought. A bit of Italian singing, can you? Very stirring. Or I guess you can beat a bit of Italian singing. You can have Italian singing that isn't in singing the praises of a cult and being used to manipulate people. But anyway, we're now in the music video presentation for the Sunday afternoon. So Sunday morning is now behind us. We've had our lunch. And to let us know that we need to find our seats, this music video presentation is now being played. So as witnesses are finding their seats, this is up on the screens, and they're being reminded of some of the most disturbing features of videos that were shown to them in previous conventions. Videos like the Sergei video from the 2016 Remain Loyal to Jehovah convention, which I dubbed the worst convention ever. So far, I'm kind of a mind that it is still the worst ever, but it's conceivable to me that that Watchtower is more than capable of topping it. Maybe not in this year's convention, but don't ever underestimate them, basically. But they are showcasing, some of the grisliest dramas from past year's conventions, including the Remember the Wife of Lot drama. All of these different characters who, to various degrees, have shown witnesses that they must stop at nothing when it comes to following what the organization requires of them. And you also have a repeat of the scene where the witnesses are all, well, basically all of these characters from the different dramas all meet together in a field, and soldiers, lots of soldiers with assault weapons, are all chasing them into this kind of forest clearing, because you're gonna need an assault weapon when it comes to tracking down Jehovah's Witnesses and throwing them in prison. We know how dangerous a Jehovah's Witness can be. So anyway, all of these witnesses are huddled together in the field. This scene is from the very last video that was shown in last year's Be Courageous convention. And bear in mind, children are in the audience here. Children are among those finding their seats or finishing their sandwiches or whatever when these images are being shown of men with guns hunting down witnesses, wishing to either throw them in jail or do worse to them purely because of their religious beliefs. Of course, this isn't going to happen, but Watchtower is determined to make witnesses believe that it's going to happen in this way, in this extremely traumatic way where you're running for your life from people with weapons. Watchtower is happy to fill the minds of young people with this sort of imagery. And I recently did a video about some Armageddon art depicting Jesus, not Kenny Rogers, Jesus, coming down out of heaven with a bow and arrow to slaughter everyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness, accompanied by the anointed. This is a bizarre genre of artwork that really Watchtower seems to be really emphasizing of late. And I received a little bit of criticism for focusing too much on the literalism of it all. So people were saying, oh, well, it's just an illustration, Lloyd. That doesn't mean that witnesses literally believe that there are going to be flying horses and people with beards who look like Kenny Rogers swooping down out of heaven with a bow and arrow. Well, if it's not to be interpreted literally, number one, why depict it so vividly in artwork? And number two, why is this video necessary? If the people chasing Jehovah's Witnesses with assault weapons are just going to drop dead all of a sudden, why not just show that? Why show literally Jesus coming down out of heaven with a bow and arrow? And as I said in a previous video, I think I'd fancy an assault weapon over a bow and arrow any day of the week. But why depict it not just in artwork but also in a video? If you're a child in the audience, what other message are you supposed to take away from this other than this is really going to happen, and in just this way, with Jesus and his angels and the anointed swooping down with bows and arrows when Armageddon comes, and they're going to kill everyone who isn't with us? Do you really want to think about skipping meetings, little David or little Joshua or little Abigail? Do you really want to take that risk? Do you really want to have almighty heavenly Jesus coming with his bow and arrow to get you? Better come to the meetings. That's the message that young people will be taking away from this. And it's disgusting. But we need to move on with the program. And actually we're going to skip part of the program, because after this music video presentation, they sing a song, and then they all watch the second half, part 2, of the feature film, The Story of Josiah, Love Jehovah, Hate What Is Bad. And I'm actually going to be doing my final rebuttal video to the convention will be about this Josiah drama, because it is actually the worst of all the videos, in my view, that get shown to Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'm going to skip that, and you can see my thoughts on the Josiah drama in the final video of this series. And we're going to move straight to the final talk of the convention, which has the theme, Carefully Consider Jehovah's Acts of Loyal Love. And to take us through this particular talk, we need to give a warm welcome to a familiar governing body member.
Loyalty, endurance, courage. Those three qualities form the themes for our past three regional conventions. Remain loyal to Jehovah. Don't give up. Be courageous. All of them powerfully call for action on our part. But now we ask, is this year's convention theme somehow different? Love never fails? Have we spent the last 3 days just talking about a feeling, a tender emotion? Far from it. This program, like the previous three programs, has been a thrilling call to action. We've been encouraged, motivated, reminded to not just feel love, but to show it. And we've been taught how to do so. Clearly, we've been taught how to show this love. Now we ask this, how urgent is it that we show love now, where we are in the stream of time, in the final part of the last days? Well, for the answer, pay careful attention to the following video, and in it, you're going to see a brother who reflects back on his time in this old world. Now, he's in the new world, paradise. He's reflecting back and how happy he is that he learned to show love in the last days.
So just before we show that video, and it's a video that we really do need to see because it's rather disturbing, it's worth just re-emphasizing the risk of repeating myself, just how misleading the theme of this convention is. In this convention, we've learned that love has a completely different meaning in the Jehovah's Witness religion. We've learned that love is all about doing as you're told. Love is apparently about following unquestioningly this man, Stephen Lett, and his pals, even to the point of shunning your loved ones if necessary. This is anything but a loving organization. This is an organization where any feelings of warmth or loyalty or friendship or affection are all conditional on you following what this man has to say and recognizing his leadership. Anyone who's been a Jehovah's Witness for any length of time and who is now in full possession of their thinking abilities is no longer being manipulated and controlled by Stephen and his friends. Anyone in that position knows this. It's only those who are still under his control that can be swept along by this sort of misleading, disingenuous rhetoric. But if you were under any illusions as to how dangerous and doomsday this organization is, you're in for a treat with the next video, because we learn the extent of the fear-mongering and the extent of the paranoia that this organization encourages for its followers.
Thinking back, I thought I knew what it meant to show love, but I had a lot to learn.
Come on. You've been at this for hours. You need sleep.
Just 5 minutes.
Ben? Carl's been calling. You really should pay him another visit. Grace says he's not doing too good.
I will, I promise. Just as soon as I get past this talk. I'd known Carl and Grace since I was 17. Carl had been my spiritual dad. He was always there for me.
I can tell you, you've been doing a great job.
2, 1. And with him being in and out of the hospital, I tried to be there for them, but I'd just been so busy. It seemed like so many new responsibilities hit me all at once.
Brother Capra, do you have a second?
Hey, Kev, maybe a little later, okay?
But I figured once my schedule freed up, I'd make more time for everyone, including Carl. What I didn't realize is how quickly time can run out.
So at this point, you're probably thinking, well, hold on a minute, Lloyd. This video doesn't seem quite as bad as you were painting it earlier. Bear with me here. We've only seen half of it. The second half is where things get really out of control very quickly. As you'll know, if you've seen my 10 worst videos of the 2019 Love Never Fails convention, yeah, things will escalate quickly. But just these opening couple of minutes do give us an insight into Jehovah's Witness culture. If you've never been a witness, you might be watching this thinking, how on earth is this guy Ben so very busy being a Jehovah's Witness to the point where his friend Carl is in hospital and he doesn't even have time to go and visit his friend? This is actually quite accurate in depicting how busy and stressful life as a Jehovah's Witness elder can be. Take it from me as someone who spent a year as an elder. When you are an elder, you are essentially a line manager for Watchtower. You are responsible for the spirituality of an entire congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, and you would be amazed at how many jobs are created to help facilitate this goal. From organizing the territory to doing the accounts to arranging the public speakers, you name it, there are any number of jobs as a Jehovah's Witness elder that can really eat up your time, especially if you're already struggling with holding down a job and just caring for the basic needs of life. It really does eat into your time, and frankly, this serves a purpose for Watchtower, in my view, because the busier you are as a Jehovah's Witness and the higher up in the organization you go, the busier you get. The busier you are, the less time you have to just take a step back and just breathe a bit and think, what on earth am I doing? What actual value is there to any of these myriad things that I'm doing and all of these crazy tasks that I'm running around breathlessly trying to achieve? What's the aim of it? Where is it all going? If you were to just have a moment to think for yourself, quite possibly you'd realize that, number one, you're being exploited, and number two, you're not really achieving anything other than, again, perpetuating an organization on a local level in a congregation. That's what being an elder is all about.
Grace said no one could know he'd pass so suddenly, and not to beat myself up about it, but I knew I would lament that decision for a long time. I never again wanted to miss an opportunity to show love.
Brother Capra, do you have a second?
Hey, Kevin, how's it going?
I realized that learning to show love more fully then would help prepare us for what lay ahead.
This was one of Carl's favorites, right?
Eventually, showing love would call for even greater sacrifices.
Where are they? Where are they?
I'm so glad that I never gave up in learning to show love, and that Jehovah never gave up on me. Now, when I see Carl, I have centuries of happy memories. Centuries of showing him and all of my brothers and sisters loyal love.
So, if you follow my channel and you've been previously in any doubts at all as to how paranoid and how doomsday this organization, Jehovah's Witnesses, really is, I submit to you Exhibit A. This video just spells it all out. We go from Ben feeling bad because he missed his friend's death because he was so busy running around doing his elder duties, which again isn't an entirely unrealistic scenario. We go from that to, oh, he's putting his territory cards in the shredder. Because that's what the police, that's what Satan's system of things are really going to be thinking about during the Great Tribulation. We want to know what all the territory boundaries are and what the do not calls are. We want access to this information. Honestly, so the police are busting down his door, they're shouting at him, they're being rough with him, and ultimately they're throwing him in jail for the crime of being a Jehovah's Witness. Now we understand what the beginning of today's program was all about when we saw in the music video presentation the footage from Russia and the archive photographs of witnesses being persecuted in the 20th century. It all becomes clear now. Watchtower needs witnesses to feel as though the world is out to get them. Even if they're in a country now where there isn't persecution, there will be persecution at some point. You can't rest. You've got to be in a constant state of fear. We need you to be fearful, because if you're fearful, you'll be easier to control. We'll sell you the fear, and then we'll sell you the antidote. And the antidote is to be a Jehovah's Witness and survive all of this persecution. Persecution that we see isolated pockets of around the world, but not everywhere. And isn't it interesting how they never talk about other religions being persecuted? In some cases, far more severely than Jehovah's Witnesses. They leave witnesses with the impression that they are the only ones being persecuted. But don't worry, everything's going to be okay in the new system when Ben and Carl are going to be friends for centuries in this utopia that's been built on the remains of 7.5 billion people slaughtered for not being Jehovah's Witnesses. Some utopia, some paradise that witnesses are looking forward to.
Well, what about you? Have you felt Jehovah's loyal love through the influence of spiritually minded friends? I know I have. At the age of 17, when I got out of high school, there was good peer pressure put on me to pioneer. And I'm very happy that I had that pressure put on me to pioneer, because back then it was viewed as if you get out of school, you don't pioneer, something must be wrong with you. What's wrong with you, brother? So that pressure, I started pioneering, and I'm so happy. So began a lifetime of happy full-time service. So good friends can really help us.
Of course, this isn't the only time that Stephen Lett has regaled us with this story of how he was manipulated into being a pioneer at the age of 17. He's also told this story in a JW Broadcasting episode.
I am so thankful to Jehovah that positive peer pressure was put on me to enter the pioneer ministry right out of high school. What a blessing and a protection it was to enter the regular pioneer work at age 17.
When you actually analyze what he's describing, he is describing coercion and manipulation. He actually calls it influence. He calls it good peer pressure. Isn't it interesting how Watchtower gets to decide whether peer pressure is good or bad? Bad peer pressure is peer pressure where a young person or a young one is being encouraged to do something that Watchtower disapproves of. But if it's something that Watchtower approves of, such as pioneering, well, that's good peer pressure. Very arbitrary when you think about it. So influence, good peer pressure, and then he relates how the thinking was when he was a young one, the thinking was, well, if you're not pioneering straight out of school, something must be wrong with you. So 17-year-old Stephen Lett is being told that there is something wrong with him if he doesn't pioneer straight out of school. And he is praising this kind of thinking. He's celebrating this kind of thinking. He's almost suggesting that this should be the thinking now, if you think about the way he's framing everything. Well, I have news for any young ones who may be watching this. There is nothing wrong with you if you go to college or if you go to university or basically do anything with your life other than pioneer. Because your youth is to be enjoyed. Your youth is where you get to decide who you are and what you want to do, whether you want to contribute in some way to the human experiment, to the human struggle, whether you have talents and skills that can be realized. It's not a time for a cult to turn you into a publicity drone, which is essentially what a pioneer is. Someone who just spends 70 hours every month doing nothing but promoting Stephen Lett and his friends as being the only real answer when it comes to finding happiness and contentment in life. There are far better ways for you to spend your youth than bending to the authority of this individual and those like him.
Now, when the dragon saw that it had been hurled down to the earth, it persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. When I read that, when the dragon saw it was hurled down to the earth, I think of someone who slammed to the floor, to the ground. Maybe the breath knocked out of him. Takes a little while to realize what happened. But when he realized what happened, he'd been kicked out and confined to the earth. Now he's mad at the woman. Now the woman is the one that threw him out of heaven. The heavenly part of Jehovah's organization, the myriads of angels that threw him out. Now he can't directly get back to them and persecute them, so he does the next best thing. He goes after the representatives of the woman, the anointed on the earth. So he launches an attack on the anointed brothers who are taking the lead in the visible part of Jehovah's organization. They are killed in a symbolic sense, thrown into prison. 1918, most of those brothers given 20-year prison sentences on false, trumped-up charges. In the eyes of the enemies, God's people, the work of the preaching of the kingdom had been killed off. Satan and his earthly cohorts, they rejoiced greatly. But then quickly, how did Jehovah show he fights for his people and his loyal love moves him to do this? Well, only 9 months later, amazingly, they were released from prison on bail, and then shortly thereafter, the appeal court reversed the erroneous convictions, all charges were dropped, and the preaching work was revived. In fact, the brothers released out of prison who remained faithful, they were shortly thereafter given a special appointment. They were appointed as the faithful and discreet slave. to care for all the spiritual interests of the kingdom here on the earth, see.
Every now and then, I'm confronted by the question, when are the governing body going to change tack and acknowledge that the 1914, 1919 theology is just manifestly wrong? It's been proven to be obsolete by the passage of time. When are they going to be original and creative and come up with something new that is at least remotely plausible? We're talking about events that are now over 100 years ago. And this is all supposed to be a short period of time that Satan was hurled down to the earth. I actually touched on this in a recent video with Jay the Comedian. It is a comedy when you think about it, that Jehovah's Witnesses are required to believe that in 1914, Jesus kicked Satan and the demons down to the earth's biosphere, where they've been confined ever since, which is why everything's worse since 1914. And a short while later, Jesus carries out an inspection of all the earth's religions, and wouldn't you know, conveniently chooses Watchtower to be his faithful slave, which is why Rutherford and his associates get released from Atlanta Penitentiary after 9 months in 1919. You would think, I mean, this just sounds so preposterous. I mean, presumably it sounds preposterous if you've never been a Jehovah's Witness and I'm describing this to you for the first time. It certainly seems preposterous to me, and I struggle sometimes to figure out how I ever believe this. I think most witnesses only believe it because they don't think about it that much. And if you actually asked most witnesses to explain 1918, 1919, they would kind of look at you like, oh, don't go there. I don't really know that much about that. You only sort of believe it when you don't know much about it, and it's just some hazy teaching that you just don't personally understand all that well. The reasons why most witnesses believe that this is God's one and only true organization is not because it was chosen in 1919, and that should be the reason. It shouldn't matter what boxes the organization is ticking, what good things it's supposedly doing around the world. It should matter whether it's been chosen by God or not. But that's not the reason why most witnesses worship. It's because of the box ticking exercise that Watchtower makes them do, and says, well, look at all the good we're doing here. Who else on the earth is doing X, Y, Z, etc., etc. None of those are reasons why it's God's organization. You're arbitrarily setting the criteria and then ticking it off. That's a box-ticking exercise. But fascinatingly, Stephen Lett is here showing that even though the governing body could, if they wanted, just focus purely on the box-ticking exercise and get rid of 1914, 1918, 1919 entirely because it's been rendered obsolete by the passage of time, they're still wedded to it. They're still captive to this teaching because they've been indoctrinated into believing it themselves, and they lack the creativity to come up with something new. And as we're going to see, they're using this teaching now in 2019, again over 100 years later, to convince Jehovah's Witnesses that the world is out to get them.
Daniel 11 and verse number 40. In the time of the end, the king of the south will engage with him, the king of the north, in a pushing. And against him, the king of the north will storm with chariots and horsemen and many ships. And he will enter into the lands and sweep through like a flood. He will also enter into the land of decoration. And many lands will be made to stumble. But these are the ones that will escape out of his hand. Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. And he will keep thrusting out his hand against the lands, and as regards the land of Egypt, she will not escape. And he will rule over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over all the detestable things of Egypt and of Libya and the Ethiopians will be at his steps. Now, we're not going to discuss all of this, but who is the king of the north today? Well, it was brought out at the annual meeting. It is Russia and its allies. Who is the king of the south? The Anglo-American world power. And since the days of the Soviet Union, this pushing continues, doesn't it? This pushing between the king of the north, the king of the south, we see increased evidence of this pushing in news reports about electronic espionage, computer attacks, trade wars. And this pushing is also resulting in hostile flooding into surrounding territories. And as we read in that scripture, the king of the north has again entered the land of decoration, the holy estate of Jehovah's people. He's entered there by means of recent bans, persecution, imprisonment of innocent servants of Jehovah. But is Jehovah still fighting for his people despite this entering the land of decoration by the king of the north? See, obviously he is. Jehovah strengthens his people. He sustains them in the face of what is done to them by the secular powers.
Right, first of all, honest question, does Stephen Lett look to you like someone who is heartbroken or distressed about what's happening to Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia? Does he look like someone who regrets the state of affairs in that country, who is personally hurting because of the oppression of Jehovah's Witnesses by the Russian authorities? I would submit that Stephen Lett is in his element, leaping on these developments as evidence for the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. We have one country, one regime that is dealing with an albeit cult-like religious minority in a very mistaken, counterproductive way, a way that only serves to fuel their persecution narrative. He is loving it. He's loving the opportunity to talk about this and wheel out the most obscure Bible verses that don't describe anything like the specifics of what we're seeing. It's like when people interpret Nostradamus or any other kind of prophecy from any source and just say, oh, well, this means this and this must mean this. It's all just stabs in the dark. It's all total speculation. What about the specifics from those verses? Because I was following along and thinking, you can only do this by quickly reading over some of the details and hoping nobody notices. What about Edom? What about Moab? What about the main part of the Ammonites? What about Egypt? What about Libya? You've got there a whole bunch of places. What are they supposed to mean? And why even mention those places if everything's supposed to be about Russia? Why confuse? Seriously, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, again, first of all, well done. But seriously, ask yourself, is this a sophisticated, efficient way to convey future events through prophecy by mentioning all of these places that have nothing to do with what's going on in Russia? How is this remotely an efficient way of conveying future events if it's all supposed to be about the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia? I would submit that just reading the verse and seeing all of the confusing kind of name dropping of places, and the way Watchtower, again, just inserts a meaning to something arbitrarily, none of it makes any sense. And as he's rattling off these interpretations, you kind of can't help but wonder whether he really believes it, because it's so outrageous. It's just so nonsensical. But he has to sell it. He has to and I'm not saying that he's totally cynical. I think it's more nuanced than that. But he has to convince his audience that because Jehovah's Witnesses in one country are receiving persecution, that means the end is near, and that means all witnesses should be on alert and be ready for Satan's world to come after them.
I love the recent video, it's been posted on their website, of Irina and Dennis Christensen. And what a beautiful video. And every time I see that Brother Christensen smile, it makes me realize that the King of the North in no way has defeated that brother. I mean, in fact, I think when I see his beautiful smile, I think of Acts 6:15, when Stephen, just before he was stoned, the Bible said he had the face of an angel. Just calm, serene in the face of that intimidating situation. You see the same thing on Brother Christensen, do we not? In fact, just recently, in a handwritten copy, Brother Christensen wrote to the governing body. And I want to read you some of what he wrote to the governing body. And he had to do it longhand because, of course, they don't give him a computer or typewriter. But here's what he wrote to the governing body from Dennis Christensen, Detention Prison, Oryol, Russia, May 5th. So just a couple of weeks ago. Dear brothers, I would like to thank you all for the great work you've done for me, especially in the last 2 years of my life. From the beginning of my arrest and time in prison, I knew that my assignment was to keep myself strong physically, emotionally, and spiritually here inside the prison walls. And I have never doubted that you would do all you could do for me outside the prison walls. I want you to know that I really love and respect you all. Although we have never met personally, I feel I know you all very well. Maybe because of the broadcasting. Dear brothers, it's so nice to see you there, your smiles, your feelings, and the love you have for Jehovah and the truth. I miss the broadcastings and to see your happy faces and living faith. So you don't let him watch it there in prison. I often pray to Jehovah about you, the governing body, because I know there is great pressure on your shoulders. For me, it's a great honor to be a little instrument in the hand of Jehovah and his Son, Jesus Christ, an instrument that they could use to preach about the kingdom and to encourage our dear brothers and sisters. But I also want to say that it's a great honor for me to serve under your guidance and advice. I hope one day in the future to meet you all face to face and thank you. But maybe it will not be possible because the time is running fast and the end of this system is getting closer and closer. I know that we have different assignments, and I'm looking forward to the day when you will take your place side by side with Jesus Christ in God's kingdom. And I will be happy to serve under your guidance then, too. Dear brothers, please be assured of the fact that I am very grateful for you, for all of your advice, all of your hard work, all of your prayers and love for me and my family. With Christian love, your brother, Dennis Christensen.
If I were Stephen Lett, I would be praying that Dennis Christensen never wakes up. And which, let's face it, if you don't have access to, or you have limited access to Watchtower propaganda for a sustained period, and you just have your own thoughts to kind of cycle through, it's not impossible that he might figure it out, even without, I don't know, JW Facts. I don't know whether he'd be able to get JW Facts. But it's not inconceivable that someone who is cut off from that constant flow of propaganda and indoctrination could figure it out and realize, oh, hold on, I'm being exploited here. And make no mistake, that's exactly the word that describes how they're using this guy who's, rotting in a Russian prison cell purely because he got roped into the wrong cult. And again, I strongly condemn what Russia is doing. I don't think there's any justification for treating people who are already victims of a cult in this way. But it has to be acknowledged that there's at least a chance that on his own, left to his own devices, Dennis Christian could wake up. And if that were to happen, this material, this footage of Stephen Lett reading Dennis Christensen's letter would not age well. And that's an area that I think that Watchtower has been fairly naive in just assuming that all of the people who feature in their propaganda material will stay as Jehovah's Witnesses all the way through to the end of their lives. It's just not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. And the more they promote one individual, the more they put themselves at risk of it backfiring. So I'm just putting it out there. I'm not saying that Dennis Christensen will wake up. I'm just saying if he were to, he would be well within his rights to feel very used and very exploited. He even uses the word instrument. I'm being used as an instrument. Well, all Jehovah's Witnesses, including those in the audience clapping along like seals to this clear example of exploitation and jumping on scary or tragic events, they're all being used as instruments of Watchtower. They just don't know it.
And you remember what Jehovah says in Ezekiel 38? He said to Gog, "You will come, many people with you, a great assembly, like clouds covering the land. You will come against my people." But in doing so, they are making a fatal mistake. Jehovah, the God of loyal love, is watching. He will be moved to act once again, fighting for his people. And this time, his reaction will be final, and it will be very swift. Open to Ezekiel chapter 38, please, and let's just read about how Jehovah's going to react. Ezekiel 38, and first of all, take a look at verse number 18. Ezekiel 38:18. Here Jehovah says, "On that day, the day when Gog invades the land of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah, my rage will flare up." Or in the reference Bible, it says that rage will come up into my nose. When I read that in the reference Bible, rage come up into his nose, I think of taking too big of a bite of horseradish. It burns through your nostrils, doesn't it? With righteous indignation, Jehovah's nostrils will burn, and he will step in with a rescue operation. And I don't know if you think about it this way, but Armageddon really is a rescue operation. He will rescue us from this attack of Gog. Now notice verse 22, Jehovah says, "I will bring my judgment against him with pestilence and bloodshed. I will rain down a torrential downpour and hailstones and fire and sulfur on him and on his troops and on the many peoples with him. And I will certainly magnify myself and sanctify myself and make myself known before the eyes of many nations. And they will have to know that I am Jehovah." Yes, his loyal love will move him. It will powerfully motivate him to rescue his people and destroy these attackers with the broom of annihilation.
This man is crazy. I'm sorry. I don't know how you can watch that. I can imagine how you can watch that as a Jehovah's Witness and think, oh yeah, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of Bible prophecy and events soon to befall us. But for anyone else who's not under this guy's spell, they're just like, he's crazy. and wow, I mean, I was talking before about kind of cynicism versus delusion, and this is why I think it's nuanced, because you look at him there and with the wide eyes and everything, and you think, yeah, he really thinks that this is going to happen. He's really sold all of this to himself, and now he's trying to sell it to everyone else. But again, what he's doing is just plucking obscure Bible verses that could be interpreted any number of ways by people living in any period in history. Oh, this means this means that. Total speculation. None of it can be proven, which is why when you look at the way they describe prophecy, they're always using qualifying words like evidently and seemingly and likely. They're not sure. They're making it up as they go along. But put him on a convention platform in front of a convention audience. This is how it's going to happen. Buckle your seatbelts, folks. But I love the way he reframes Armageddon as a rescue operation. That's what Armageddon is. It's a rescue operation. None of this talk of global genocide, thank you. There are people who need rescuing. And there's 8.5 million of them. Well, slightly less once we've got rid of all those who aren't doing at least an hour every week. So once we've got rid of the kind of fringe witnesses, there'll still be a few witnesses, and they'll need rescuing from being oppressed by Satan's system of things, as we can see happening in a handful of countries already. But it's going to happen everywhere. And Jehovah's Witnesses are going to need rescuing. It's not at all a case of this being genocide, of this being the world's population wiped out, save a few million on the grounds of their religious beliefs, so that the planet can be populated only with one religion. However you choose to frame it, that for me is not a rescue operation. That's carnage.
Unfailing love, that's what Jehovah gives, that's what He is. Love, unfailing love, that's what we need to live, and the love here today in our heart, may it stay. Love, unfailing love, that's what Jehovah gives, that's what He is. Love, unfailing love, that's what we need to live, and the love here today in our heart, may it stay. Unfailing love, unfailing love, unfailing
So Watchtower seems to like ending the convention with a rousing musical number. And last year they had the music video where the witnesses are all huddled in the field as men with assault weapons circle them. And that was the kind of rousing finale. And we don't have anything quite as crazy as that this year, but we do have this very emotionally manipulative song that they've come up with called Unfailing Love, obviously playing on the theme of the convention there, Love Never Fails. And witnesses are here being asked to think not about shunning, not about the high expectations, the micromanagement, the scaremongering, the fearmongering, the way young people are having their lives, their futures, their opportunities taken from them, to forget about all of that and just think about the conventions and think about the love bombing, think about different cultures coming to these propaganda rallies and hugging each other. Just think about the nice stuff. Don't think about reality focus purely on how this makes you feel. Because if you're only thinking about how it makes you feel, you're not going to be thinking about whether it actually makes sense, whether it's actually objectively love. Because when you look at things objectively and you hear people's stories and you think about what being a Jehovah's Witness means, and the judgmentalism and the us versus them black and white thinking, you quickly realize that this is lots of things, this organization, but it is most certainly not a loving organization.
What an outstanding video, and what a beautiful, motivating song that went along with that video. But brothers and sisters, may all of us be determined to apply the lessons of this wonderful convention that Jehovah's given us. May we apply these lessons fully determined that love will never fail. Now we know Jehovah will never fail. His love will never fail. Well, may we be determined to imitate him in letting our love never, ever fail, all to Jehovah's glory.
And thus ends the 2019 Love Never Fails Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, I say thus ends. We still have one more video in the rebuttal series, where again I'll be going through the drama, the story of Josiah. I really do consider that to be the most disturbing material that's shown to witnesses at this convention, for reasons I'm going to go into. But yeah, I mean, it was basically a cookie cutter, paint by numbers ending to a convention. Remind witnesses that they are a persecuted minority, make them fearful, remind them of the bogeyman under the bed, remind them of the need to persevere, to endure, to stay loyal, play to their emotions, try to distract them from thinking critically, from thinking logically, sell the positives, ignore all the negatives, make them feel as though this is the only place where they can feel loved and accepted and appreciated. And we saw all of those things in Stephen Lett's talk, with a little bit of craziness, or not a little bit, a lot of craziness and delusion thrown in. But those were my thoughts for the Sunday of the 2019 Love Never Fails Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. Again, look out for the final video in this rebuttal series about the story of Josiah. But that's pretty much all I have for you. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos. And as always, thank you for watching.